This is Dr. Koenig, and this is Counseling Research, Chapter 9, and Chapter 9 is Case Study Research. So case study research is used to explore events, to construct theories, develop models, create treatments, or understand the behavior of individuals. So if we need to answer, the how or the why of a situation or a phenomenon, then we might want to choose case study research. So in case study research, we observe our participants rather than manipulate their behavior or control the events. Now, in your book, you will notice that you see Yin referenced many, many times throughout the chapter. He is one of the sort of giants in the field of case study research. And also, another person who is very well published when it comes to case study research is Robert Stake. So what I've done is I've actually substituted most of the slides in this chapter from a slide share that both Robert Yin have made and Robert Stake have made. So hopefully, I thought this was a little more succinct and easier to understand. So you have the original slides that came from the publisher, and hopefully this will just serve to give another perspective or flesh that out. Okay, so case studies, the purpose for case study could be explanatory, exploratory, or descriptive. Case study inquiry, it copes with technically distinctive situations with a lot of variables or interest points. It can also benefit from the prior development of theoretical propositions. So don't confuse case study research with something that is strictly qualitative, because case study research normally is a mix of qualitative and quantitative methods. So case study might be our preferred strategy. You see here the list on the right when we want to answer the question how or why, if we really don't have any control over events, or when the focus is some type of contemporary phenomenon in a real life context. One of the things that has occurred to me as I've been looking at this chapter and reflecting on case studies is that we have noticed that there is a lot of drug activity in our area. If you watch the news at all, you notice that there's opiates. There's lots and lots of problems with opiates. So one of the things that might make an interesting case study is looking at the response of families who have a person who is addicted to opiates. And particularly, I've become interested in compassion fatigue related to opiate addiction. So this is not something, of course, that we could manipulate, or we could not control that, but we could choose cases of families where someone has developed an addiction and do some case studies related to that. And this would be the perfect type of situation that would lend itself to that type of research. Okay, so within case study research, we have similar strategies. You can see here on your left, there's 5 types of strategies here. And the forms of research question is the next column over, and it tells you what form of research question you would be having in order to use the strategy on the left. It's important to look down at the bottom of this slide because this gives you a definition of what case study research is. And it basically just investigates a contemporary phenomenon within the real life context. It's especially useful when boundaries between the phenomena and the context aren't clearly defined. Okay, so the important thing in this slide really is that case studies are not suited whenever we have a need to know the prevalence of a phenomenon. If we were looking for prevalence or frequency, something like that, we would want to use statistical sampling. But if we want to use a case study design, we want to have some type of theory that we're working from. And then once we have the theory, we can develop our research plan. All right. So in this slide are case study tactics. We want to look at this and sort of see these are the different things that we would need to do to make sure that our test was valid and that our test was reliable, or that our research was valid and reliable. And this is what we use whenever we're looking at case studies. All right. Here's some of the rationales for using a single case study design. If we have a situation that represents a critical case, then we might want to use a case study design and choose that particular critical case, something that is extreme or unique. Or we might want to choose what represents a typical case of a larger experience. And when I was making reference to the opioid issue earlier, that would be where this would fall, representative of an experience of a larger population. Revelatory, something that was previously not accessible to the scientific community. And longitudinal, we could also look at the opiate issue through a longitudinal lens, how certain conditions have changed over time. And if we were looking at compassion fatigue toward addiction, then this might be the lens that we want to look through. All right, so a couple of type of single case designs. One is embedded, the other is holistic. You can look at those more, flesh those out in your book. And then one of the things that we really need to look at when we're looking at case study design is replication, because we want to hopefully be able to replicate a case study several times in order to assess whether or not what we found initially is accurate. All right. So normally we want to use a multiple design over a single case design. If we use a single case, be prepared that there's going to be a lot of questions about whether or not that really is going to represent anything besides the single case that was actually being looked at. So if we have a single case design, then we're going to have to replicate that several times in order to have more confidence in what our findings were. All right, so when it comes to reporting our research, if we're using a case study design, the research report can be structured in any one of these ways that you see in this table here on the left. So this is our type of structures. This tells us a little bit more about what that approach looks like. And then this tells us if this particular type of report falls under an explanatory purpose, a descriptive purpose, or an exploratory purpose. So some of this in the middle, the approach, I think is pretty easy to understand from this slide, but I also left in the Pearson slide here that gives a little different explanation as to what each one of these structures are, so that if you have any difficulty with this table, then hopefully it'll become clearer when you look at the Pearson slide. All right, so according to Yin, an exemplary case study, it must be significant, it must be complete, it has to consider all the alternative perspectives. You have to have sufficient evidence for what it is that you are concluding, and it needs to be composed in an engaging manner. In other words, you have to pull the reader in. It has to be readable and it has to be interesting to the reader. So this is a little bit different type of writing than what it is that we normally do when it comes to psychology and counseling, but sometimes this type of writing can actually be refreshing. Okay, so more on the report. Now notice here that this is not Dr. Yin, this is actually Robert Stake, and this was sort of his idea about what needs to go into a report. So he's saying you can divide it up into sections, and here are the sections that he feels like would be the best to communicate a case study report. So here's part of it, and I do believe that it's continued here. So you can see there are actually several sections here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sections to a case study report. All right, let's see. He does make this note down here, and this is still Robert Stake, that even though case study reporting the writing is very different than what we do if we're doing some type of quantitative experiment and writing that report, it's not just telling a story. That there is a very it is very structured, and there should be purpose in each one of these sections. Okay. So, according to Robert Stake, these are the things that he has said, and this list is quite extensive, I thought, but these are the things that he has said he would really look at if he was evaluating a case study research report. And you'll notice that a lot of these things are just good writing and a person who has really taken time to make sure that everything is represented in the report from the data and it's represented well. And that ends chapter 9.